So, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about water. And initially, this lecture was going to be titled Water Management, but through the process of putting this together, um, I kind of thought it would be interesting to look at it as a larger idea or an element, also a way for us to sensitize ourselves to understanding the natural course of water. And since we've kind of already touched upon, how water runs through your various aspects of tanks and pipes, and what is required for running your building efficiently, and we've kind of taken that through in most of your ideas projects. I thought it would be interesting to look at it from a larger narrative point of view. So let's see how it goes and have a good discussion towards the end, I hope. um, so to begin with, I think we've all, grown up with understanding that 29% of the earth is land and 71% of it is water, and 60% of our body consistency is kind of, is water. So in a sense that essentially our own ecology is made up of water, largely, and ecology we're part of is largely developed around water. So water is kind of free and finds its own path. It meanders through larger landscapes and kind of pours life into whatever it goes by. We need it to kind of help with our cultivation and agriculture. When there is an abundance of it, I think most of it works. When we have a shortage of it, we know the kind of problems we face. The smallest organisms and the smallest kind of elements on this earth require water to thrive. It kind of creates the balance in the ecology that we need to survive. Even the most kind of arid regions require water for them to kind of survive and thrive. It's not that these could survive without water. It's just that this is possibly lesser in quantity that they require than many other landscapes. So water is able to kind of create the same experience across boundaries or borders that we have created and drawn a line between to divide land. But the experience could remain the same on either side. So when water is such a powerful element, why do we think that we could dictate terms to decide how it should flow and where it should flow? And this is a way to kind of just present an argument and a way to kind of think about what are the possibilities in a way that we can deal with water. Also, something that we should always remember is that our civilizations and the most ancient civilizations kind of started around rivers and the abundance of water, and Mesopotamia being the first few. Tigris and Euphrates were the kind of rich water bodies, and that's where life actually started. Um, so, what are the ways that we're dealing with water today? And what is the other take that we could have for the same? So, this is one of the drawings of the Sabarmati riverfront that we've um, read about or seen in Ahmedabad. And immediately, as one kind of talks about a riverfront development or in the urban setting, immediately we kind of see that there is a positioning of reclaimed land that's been done. So you've already kind of decided that the width will be reduced, and you will kind of tell water where to flow. And in a sense that this was also cited in the context of having floods. And the question then arises, is that if if you are kind of reducing the way that water needs to flow, are you actually reducing the possibility of a flood? And whether kind of adding these vertical hard lines and creating that very strong division between the water and the land is going to really solve the problem. So, as much as we call this a landscape intervention, is this our way of kind of interacting with this largely abundant element, something that we cannot belong without? Experientially, we've kind of taken it off from ourselves completely. We want to see it from a distance, and we then want to say that we're dealing with water or we're calling it a waterfront development without actually knowing what the water needs. Um, so it's essentially a hardscape which is kind of sprinkled with a few trees along the entire length, and that's what we call as the riverfront front development today. Now, there are many other examples. This is one of in Calcutta, where the Hooghly waterfront has been developed, and you can see the hard edges that have been created along. And of course, there is a lot of understanding of the real estate and many other aspects that play with this. But is this what our language is today, and is this what we want to take ahead? Um, so these are a few images of the Sundarbans. Now, Sundarbans, as we know it, are the largest kind of delta region, and you have, the mangroves, largest kind of mangrove belt used to thrive there. And today we see that there is a large amount of erosion happening towards the edges, and that's why there is a loss of mangroves, and largely the mangroves have been depleting. This is causing a threat to the livelihoods there, and of course there is a need to look at how the edge is kind of going to be dealt with or reconstructed. But are these the answers to our development of the edges, our hardening of the edges, going to kind of create a way forward? Is that going to allow for any kind of ecology to thrive from here on? And is that going to be, working in the longer run? These are questions that one needs to answer. So, are there any other ways that water has been dealt with on these edge kind of fronts before, and is there something that we can learn from the existing? So, I mean, I really thought that we could put in the ghats here, and something that we've all seen develop along edges of riverfronts. Also, because in India, culturally, the river has always been holy, and there has always been kind of this connection that we've always wanted to create with water, whether it be man going into the water and kind of performing ceremonies, or you know bathing and feeling that this is the way of cleansing themselves, or kind of creating some kind of access routes, etc. This is the way that it has been dealt with earlier. Now, whether then the question then arises is that this is a hard edge too. What is different from what we're doing today to what was done earlier? And from what I understand, I think that the section is pretty inclusive of the understanding of when the water rises and falls. This is kind of going to be able to take it. So when the water rises, there is going to be a certain level that the water rises up to, and once it kind of recedes, it's going to come back to a certain point, and life can go back to normal, and the interaction between man and water will still remain the same, which I feel like we may have cut off a little bit from kind of hardening the edge and kind of putting like the straight wall and saying that we do not want to deal with it any further. So that is one way of kind of looking at it, and something that we could probably discuss and look at. um, I just wanted to put, I mean, in this section, the adaptive landscapes, I just wanted to put in a few images, something that, even I have observed while traveling, some readings, etc. These are a few images of, flying over Bangladesh. Again, a delta region, essentially a floodplain. So towards the monsoon time, it kind of, becomes a large monsoon landscape gathering the rainwater, and the agricultural plain essentially becomes a flood plain, and that's when actually the people adapt to kind of using this as a fishing area, versus when the water recedes, it goes back to becoming an agricultural plot again. So now you just see that people are kind of adapting their lives around what the natural course of this element is, and not dictating the other way around. These are a few images from the Lunuganga estate, and we kind of see that water is very intrinsically part of the entire understanding of the landscape, in a sense that in this you, it could become eventually a submerged landscape if there is excess of water, and then it would recede and kind of go back to its normal sense. But there is no kind of hard way of making the water flow in a certain manner. um, I think I kind of put this image in because again it's from the Lunuganga estate, but this image is kind of put in also to show that okay, there is a cascading element that has been created, but essentially everything else has been left porous for water kind of to take its own course and kind of percolate and survive and allow for the landscape to grow within it. I think there is a twofold possibility here. One is that you're kind of allowing this element to take its own paths and allow it to be free. And secondly, while doing this, because you're kind of respecting the natural course of things, one would also kind of develop the ecology or the planting palette to the same kind of to kind of go back to the same thing. So you will kind of end up putting your native trees and not kind of go into exotic situations which will not be able to thrive in this kind of a landscape. So, so are there any kind of projects that we could learn from? And what are the ways that the water story can be woven around the projects that have been even done in the past? So this was an interesting landscape. Now Mandu is essentially dependent on the rainwater. It doesn't have any kind of groundwater. So even if you kind of dug boreholes there, you're not going to find any water eventually in the ground plane. So essentially, they've always been dependent on rainwater. So the many complexes that one may visit, the historical complexes that exist within Mandu, you'll see that each of the complexes have their own way of kind of dealing with water and have kind of woven the structures around the narrative of what they want to do with this element. So what we are looking at is the Jahaz Mahal. Jahaz essentially meaning to be a ship. So that's the main building, which is called which is the main Jahaz Mahal, and we'll see why. So I'm going to just run you through some of the elements that kind of exist in this complex, which is a very intrinsic like water holding system. So this is the entrance of the complex, and you kind of see this like Suraj Talab towards the left. Then you have the larger two tanks, which is this Kapoor Talab and the Munja tank. Essentially, this is the largest holding tank, and the water is kind of held in the monsoon season, and then over time you would like to hold it over the entire year. You do not want to lose any of that water. That's going to kind of help the entire complex function over time, even after the monsoon. You have the Champa Baoli here, which is within the building actually, and that the rooms around the Champa Baoli eventually become used as the summer palace because of the way that the Baoli is kind of being placed centrally between many rooms and kind of cools the entire system around it. This is one of the hammams that you see, and then there is this Ujala and Andheri Bauli. They are two step wells. I mean, sorry, Ujala Bauli is a step well, and the Andheri Bauli is actually a closed tank. Ujala because it is an open tank, and this one is a closed one. What you see, yeah, what I've marked here is basically, your Suraj Talao is actually meant to kind of provide water to two of these pools that exist on the ground floor and the first floor of the main building, and they are essentially recreational pools. And they could also thrive, over time, even beyond your monsoon, because of the very interesting water system that has been created. So without going into too many details, I think I want to just talk about the larger kind of perspective of what this is in the monsoon landscape. And this is the main street that I kind of showed you on the plan. This is the entrance street, and this is the main building, and that's the Suraj Talab. Um, this is that Kapoor tank where most of the water gets stored. And if you kind of see this, there is a canal connection that has been created here. Basically, that's the canal connection. So any overflow from your Kapoor tank would be kind of taken into this canal. This is a view, looking at the Suraj Talab. This is the entrance portion. This is where your Kapoor tank to the left would be, and that's your Munja tank, which is towards the right. Now, the canal actually gets then connected towards the Munja tank. So any overflow from your Kapoor tank would then come into the Munja tank, and that's actually a very interesting kind of situation, because anytime that this tank overflows, if there was no other outlet to it, this could kind of overflow and kind of become a flood situation into the complex. But actually allowing this water to go into the other side, which is supposed to be the celebration of, the monsoon landscape. The Munja tank essentially is a celebration of the monsoon landscape, allows it to, kind of coexist with this whole water condition that has been created. Um, so this is your main building that you see. These are the various plinths that, okay, I think I've missed saying one thing towards the beginning. I'm just going to so while you have the Jahaz Mahal here, towards the back is actually the Jal Mahal. The Munja tank that you have, that has been created, is basically a celebration of the monsoon landscape. So all the water that has been collected during the monsoon will kind of be collected here, and most of your plinths and the connections that you have from the various buildings to get to the Jal Mahal are going to be floating on top. So essentially, you will be seeing this large kind of water holding, and the king with his wives would go and kind of reside in the Jal Mahal during the monsoon to celebrate the idea of water. Um, so these are some images of where you can see the summer landscape versus the monsoon landscape. And this is how I had seen it at a peak monsoon time, where you kind of had the water filled up to a certain point, and during the summer, then it kind of recedes and goes back to being almost zero. These are a few other tanks that is towards the Jal Mahal, which are holding water. Some of them are closed in the at the bottom. These are a few other images where you kind of see in the background how the water has been held along the larger landscape. Yeah, some of these are like channels which are kind of carrying water back to the tanks, etc. There are many pools across the entire complex. So essentially, this is a celebration of water. It is a celebration of the larger monsoon landscape that this is set in. And if somebody saw it at absolutely peak monsoon, where there's enough water that has been received, etc., the water level could be up to this point, and then what you essentially see is that this kind of building is floating within water. And that's the whole idea of even calling it Jahaz Mahal, because it's kind of this building which is floating on water, and it kind of actually behaves like a ship. So the reason to show you this is also in a way that there is this complex that is built around water, and there is a water narrative that has been woven as the design has kind of progressed. The other area or the bioregion that I'd like to talk about is Hampi. Now, again, Hampi itself being a very kind of bolder landscape in Karnataka. Hampi has this kind of, is dependent on this one river, which is the Tungabhadra River. And very interestingly, if you see on this map, there are many kind of, canals which are connecting from all these reservoirs. So, in a sense that there is this river, and then you have this many reservoirs that have been created, and there is a whole canal system that has been created and is cutting across this map, and one could kind of map it and kind of see where all the connections are going. um, So what we are kind of looking at is some of the images of the main, tank in the main complex of Hampi. So what you have is a general boulder landscape, and it's kind of a hilly landscape as well. So there is a level difference at all points. Um, And you have the, actually, I've missed one image of the river, but you have the river passing throughout. So basically, we're looking at the Pushkarni tank, and Hampi is essentially, a series of these aqueducts and canals that have been worked out around collecting water into these reservoirs or tanks to ensure that, again, they have water all around the year. And these canals and aqueducts allow for the water to be kind of taken and carried forward across the entire complex of Hampi. Um, so these are some of the aqueducts that you see in stone. So you see one of them kind of crossing here in the field. Yeah, so that is the image that I wanted to show you. Basically, that's the river at the background, and then you kind of have the boulder landscape, and then you have, one of the tanks in the main complex. So essentially, when this was kind of studied further to understand how the water has been dealt with, because it was noticed that most of these tanks were filled and were still thriving. And is there something that one could learn from eventually in the way that water has been dealt with here? Basically, what has been done was there is a series of percolation pits from the high ground to the low ground, and so the water, by the time kind of it reaches down to your main kund, it has been cleaned off, because there is a series of percolation pits that are happening. So the any kind of sedimentation or any kind of like particles that have been carried are already deposited in these areas, and then they are kind of taken down into the only the main runoff will kind of come down into your tank. So that essentially fills your main kund, and also the series of percolations that are happening over time, this percolation water will also go and connect with the kund and allow for the groundwater recharge to happen, and that's how the water is abundantly available through the year, and that's how this civilization kind of existed back then. And that is something we could learn from and probably adopt in ways today, in the way that we deal with various landscapes and water within those. So I would also, I mean, towards the end, I just want to kind of leave you with one case study, which was interesting, which is a smaller project, but seems like has been dealt with water first, and everything around it then comes in later. And that's actually the Temple of Steps by Sandeep Arora, which is in the Nandyal area of Andhra Pradesh. Now, again, this is kind of a drier region. I mean, it has this extreme climate of, Andhra Pradesh, and what you see is that this stepped kind of terrain has been created as a temple, and it is kind of sitting within this pool of water. Now, what had essentially happened is that there was a canal which was carrying, canal system which was carrying water to the farms around. And when the project was kind of initiated, they realized that that canal was actually running dry. So, in order to kind of recharge the groundwater, it so happened that the overflow from any of the um, what do you call it, overflow from some of the regions were kind of taken into this kund, and then kind of allowed for a groundwater recharge along the temple of steps that have been created. So essentially, this is what has been done. So basically, there has been a low ground that has been created, and that's where the water has been kind of held on either side, and that allows for the percolation to happen, and hence you're kind of recharging the groundwater, and then you kind of start stepping up and create this kind of a formation that is becoming a temple. Now, this was also, one could understand this diagram better and study it further. But this was also kind of, an adaptation of the Ghat section where there is a constant kind of connection with water. One could kind of go down to um, um, experience the same. One could stay up and kind of, visually have a connection. But essentially, the idea of it kind of came with understanding what the connection with water is and to maintain that connection at all times. So, in a sense, that one could always look at this project from the point of view of again, looking at it from a narrative of water and not essentially just being an architectural insert which did not have much to do with any of the land, surrounding context. And in a sense that it's kind of driven by the idea of water. And I'm going to kind of leave you with this thought towards the end, where Anuradha Mathur and Dilip Dakuna, who are landscape architects and work with the idea of water abundantly, have kind of put this idea of water and wetness together, and it's just a thought and something that um, it could be with you and you could think about it further and for us to discuss it further. I'm not going to read it, I'm going to leave it here on your screens. And I'm going to request for all the faculty members to now come in, and if there's any comments or discussion, we could have that now. Anybody who has questions, please go ahead.
Would anybody like to ask a question among the students?